Hello, I'm William Schrickel, the music director of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. Welcome to MSO Composers Roundtable. I've been the music director of the MSO for 20 years, and it's rare that I have programmed and conducted a concert that didn't include at least one work by a living composer. As the MSO and I prepare now for our new season of upcoming concerts beginning in October of 2021, I thought it would be wonderful to speak with three composers who have written works specifically for the MSO and me to perform. Carol Barnett, Jocelyn Hagen, and Polina Nazaykinskaya are three of the finest composers writing symphonic music today. I'm going to speak with each of them individually, and then we will all join up for a roundtable discussion about the current state of orchestral composing. Thanks for joining us. Composer Carol Barnett is a regular on these MSO produced programs we've been doing in the last year. Carol has been commissioned and has completed a new work that the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra and I will perform along with mezzo-soprano Clara Osofsky in May of 2022. We'll talk a little bit with Carol about that piece in the context of our discussion. But Carol, I want to thank you for again being part of these programs and welcome you to this program today.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure, as always.
I wanted to ask you how a young woman from Dubuque, Iowa, came to become a musician and a composer. Tell us a little bit about your path to where you are now.
Well, I was born in Dubuque, and they moved me out of there before I was a year old, so I have no recollection, and I hadn't been back until about a year ago. But they moved me up to northern Minnesota, and we landed in a small town called Fosston, which was on number 2 going from Grand Forks to Duluth. Later moved to Crookston. My dad was a piano teacher, and that's why we moved up there. Somebody asked him to come and teach up there, and so there we are. He taught all his students at home, and for a while he was also elementary music, general music teacher in Fosston. You know, there were pianos, and I was tempted to bang on them, and so I got started in, organized banging quite early, so that it would it would be not quite so obnoxious. And my dad, when he was growing up, had piano lessons up north of the border in Fort Francis, which is right across the border from International Falls. And his piano teacher came as an immigrant from Germany and was a very distant cousin, I guess, of Hugo Wolf. And so he had all his students composing. And so my dad sort of followed in that direction and had all his students composing too. So it was just a very natural progression. Some of us took it farther than others, I guess.
When did you decide that you were going to pursue composition in a strong way with your education, and where and with whom did you study that?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be a musician, and I thought, I'm okay as a piano player, I'm okay as a flutist, but I know there are lots more people that are better than I am. But I think that I am fairly decent as a composer, writing music. And so I went to the University of Minnesota because that's where both my parents had gone. That's where they met. And I was used to the environment here actually, because we used to come down for 10 grand piano concerts and, MMTA contests and things. So it was a natural, and I fit in, and there you are. I studied mostly with Paul Fettler, but I occupied the same office as Dominic Argento because I was one of his TAs for several years. So there was that influence too.
What were your composition classes with Dr. Fettler and Dominic? What was a typical semester like? What were your assignments? How did these if you assuming you had some lessons with Dominic as well, were there similarities and differences with how they approached teaching?
Oh yeah. With Dr. Fettler, it was Friday seminars at what I think it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Fridays, and we would all come in, maybe 5 or 6 of us, and play our stuff on the piano and talk about it. And he would point out things, and we would defend. And um, uh, I think in those seminars is where the idea for the American Composers Forum was born, because of course not all of us were whizzes on the piano, and just to play something on the piano and explain it just really was pretty inadequate for a lot of us. And so Libby and Paul and Steve Paulus thought, well, let's get some real players, and so it just all sort of grew from there. With Dominic, it was more one-on-one, and you would go in and sit in that really creaky rattan chair, and hand in your measly little, well, for me, measly little 1 or 2 pages, and he would just sort of sit there and look at it and sort of sprinkle ashes over it, and because at that point he was smoking, and you know. We were both disappointed that I hadn't written more, and that was sort of it. I think I got at least as much from just being in the office and listening and hearing his compositions in various places as I did with from the lessons.
You have a new work that the MSO and I will perform along with mezzo-soprano Clara Osowski in May of 2022. It's been delayed because of COVID, but we're really excited that we'll be doing actually 2 performances of it here in the Twin Cities, called Will's Ladies. And tell us about that piece, about the texts, and about how you came to be working with Clara.
Well, this has been a long-term project. Dream of mine. Will's Ladies probably, the idea took form maybe 20 years ago, and I thought, well, for whom and all that sort of thing. It's got to be female heroines of Shakespeare for sure. And then I discovered Clara about 10 years ago now, and thought, yes, I think I need to write it for Clara, but what's it going to be like? And then I realized that Clara had been singing with you guys and women, and I thought, well, that could work. And then my husband, John Tartaglia, who played with you in the Minnesota Orchestra, had several pieces done. Thank you, Bill. And when he died, I thought, I think I could maybe step into that slot where. So maybe the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra can be my lab band too. So it just all sort of came together, and I thought, this will work. So actually, I had started working on the first movement of this before John died, just about maybe a month or two, just because we were housebound and it was something to do just while sitting there. So Portia got pretty well done, and then the rest of them followed after that. So it's Portia, it's Juliet, and of course Juliet is the same text as my teacher Dominic Argento set in his Mask of Night. And so of course I first started writing it, and I thought, this sounds really familiar. And it was. I mean, I just started, from my mind, which I hadn't listened to his setting for a long time, but I still remembered it. And so, well, but that movement is an homage, a love letter, I guess, to Dominic. And then it's Lady Macbeth, which is totally different. She reads the letter from her husband, Macbeth, who is just met the witches and says, "Guess what? And I'm going to be king." And Lady Macbeth said, "Well, yeah, he will be if I can, straighten his spine a little bit and get him to really be bad." And so that's Lady Macbeth. And then there's Ophelia, who goes crazy. And then there's Cleopatra. And the Cleopatra, Ophelia was fun to write. In fact, all of them were. But Cleopatra gave me the most problems because it's at the very end of the play. Mark Antony is dead. Caesar is coming to get her. And she's trying to decide how to go out with, the panache and flourish that befits Cleopatra the Queen. So that's his. I hope that movement works. I'm pretty sure the rest of them will, but I'm a little bit nervous about the last movement.
When you think about your career as a student and as a teacher, because you are a wonderful composition teacher as well, and composition in theory, there's so much attention being paid now to differences in how artists are treated because of their gender. Is there anything specific that you think of, either as a time when you were, maybe even before you were a composer, maybe when you were a pianist and working on the flute, anything where you felt like you were treated differently because you were a woman?
Yes, probably so. I think it's in general that way. Gender differences are just innate, and I think that we just deal with it basically, and sometimes it works to our advantage. Speaking as a woman, because people sit up and say, "Oh well, we haven't had enough women," and so, but sometimes it doesn't because we're not in the old boys network and all that sort of thing. I think one of the funniest, not really funny, but ironic things happened when I was, I think, in second year of theory, and there were 20 of us sitting in the room and discussing things, and there was a trumpet player from the marching band over in one corner. He said, "Well, women don't write music." I started to get mad, and I thought, he doesn't know anything. I write music. Libby writes music. We all write music. He's just a dumb trumpet player from the marching band. So, it was a question of, I know what I can do. And I know what other women can do. I know what other men can do. It's a question of always exploring and trying to not just be generalizing and biased that way, just always reaching out and finding what the particulars are. It's always a question of learning and growing. Hopefully we do that until we die.
Composer Jocelyn Hagen has composed 2 works on commission for the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. The first, Solar, was premiered in 2012, and then in 2019, along with the Minnesota Chorale, we performed the premiere of The Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. It's so wonderful to have you here today, Jocelyn. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for the invitation.
I was first told about you by Melissa Mori, who is the principal horn of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. And probably 11 years ago, she mentioned that she knew this wonderful composer with whom she had gone to school at St. Olaf, named Jocelyn Hagen, and maybe we should look into seeing about having her write something for us. And we contacted you, and the end result was Solar. Can you tell us a little bit about going back in time about that commission, about writing that piece?
Of course, yes. Well, I always felt a very special connection to Melissa Morey because we're both North Dakota girls. So we grew up, hours from each other in North Dakota. Of course, we didn't know each other back then. But then, and also I was a horn player, but I didn't play much at Olaf, just one semester because, piano and singing kind of took over. But yeah, we knew each other there and then afterwards as well. And I was so excited when she talked to me about, you should write us a piece. That's always really, really a thrill. And so we decided to write a grant to see if we could get a commission going for this work, and we got it. So I did.
How did you get to the point of being a composer? What got you from North Dakota growing up to be a pianist, singer, horn player, and composer? What was your path?
Growing up in North Dakota, I always knew I wanted to do something creative. I was always making things up, plays or, little musicals or improvising at the piano. And so I knew that that's what I wanted to devote my life to, was making music and being creative with it. But I didn't really understand that I could be a composer as a career until I went to college. Because growing up in rural North Dakota, I didn't ever know any composers. I'd only been to a handful of symphony concerts, the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony, and yeah, never once had ever met a composer. And that's one of the coolest things about living now, is that composers you can talk with them, you can Zoom with them, it's a much different environment than when I grew up. And I remember in high school, just, sitting in my bedroom and having orchestral music running through my head and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great if one day I could figure out how to write that down? And so I think it was always in there, inevitable, and I just had to learn how to do it. So so that's, going to St. Olaf, and I got 2 degrees there, vocal music education and theory and composition. And then I went to get my master's at the University of Minnesota in composition.
When you wrote Solar, if I remember correctly, it was your first orchestra only piece. What had you been writing primarily piano or vocal music or chamber music? Where were you at that point in 2012 when you made the jump to writing for a full orchestra?
Yeah, so I had tackled orchestra before, but only with chorus. Because I'm a singer and living in Minnesota, it's a wonderful place to grow a composition career when you write for choirs, because there are so many choirs here and they all love to commission. So it was a really wonderful place to be as a young composer. But yeah, it's hard to break into the orchestral world. And so I was really excited to write my first piece simply for full orchestra without voices. And yeah, I don't get to do it very often, but because I still think that Solar needs a companion piece. I think Lunar is in there somewhere in that brain.
Well, I think when Lunar is ready to be birthed, I know exactly the conductor and orchestra that you need to come to.
Oh, I hope so.
So Solar was premiered in 2012, but now we jump forward 7 years to a big, wonderful, exotic piece called The Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci that the Minnesota Chorale and the MSO premiered in a pair of performances. It's an extraordinary work, and it incorporates so many new ideas. Tell us about Notebooks.
Yeah, so the Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci is my first multimedia symphony. And I got to tell you, as soon as I was done writing that one, I was like, oh, what am I doing next? Because it was so much fun to conceive of the visuals at the same time as the music. I'm a very visual person. In fact, one of my favorite art forms to take in is dance. And I think, one of my best friends is Penelope Free, and we've collaborated several times. And I think, there's just something about that art form that I love. So it was really great to partner with filmmakers to come up with the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. And I spent a lot of time researching Da Vinci himself, but also his different inventions and what he studied, and his notebook pages. I mean, there are over 5,000 pages that have survived, and I'm sure more thousands that didn't survive,
For the viewers of this program who maybe weren't able to be at that pair of performances that were so amazing in 2019, tell us about that visual element and how it was done and what made it different from just showing a film along with a piece of music.
Yeah. So the thing that brought me to that piece, that I knew I wanted to make that piece of music, was there was a new technology that had just been created in Minnesota called Mosaic, which allows for the syncing of video to live music without the use of a click track. And I absolutely love this because, I'd been to the orchestra to see Home Alone, what else, Pixar stuff. And, you've all got that click in your ear, and it's hard to play musically and just let the music lead the performance when you're locked into a film. So what's beautiful about this technology is it really lets the music lead. So the conductor and the musicians can feel in the moment how the music is supposed to be, and follow those natural instincts, and the film will sync. Because the person running the film essentially becomes another member of the orchestra.
I know that the MSO and the chorale were sort of the lead partners in a consortium of a number of groups that were in on commissioning the piece. And I know you got a number of performances, and I know that a couple of big ones were canceled due to COVID. It was going to be played at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
Are you at the point now of, have you been able to recover some of those lost performances? And how many roughly have you had so far? And what do you have booked in the next year or two for that particular piece?
Yeah, there ended up being 21 groups in the consortium, which was amazing. And at the end, people just asked to join. I stopped reaching out to people. People had heard about it and wanted to be a part of it. And that felt really great because I was trying this new thing, so a lot of people had faith that I would succeed in the endeavor. But I think we had about 20 performances so far in 2019 and the beginning of 2020. And I think there are about 10 left that are part of the consortium. And then I've had a couple people reach out now and say, okay, when's it out of the consortium? When can we do it? So I'm just so thrilled that audiences are enjoying it and that people want to do it, because that's one of the main reasons I write, is to connect with audiences.
Are you aware of any difficulties that you had getting to this point in your career, and even at this point in your career, that come to you specifically because you are a female as opposed to a male?
Yeah. And for a long time, I didn't ever want to really talk about it. I always kind of lived by the motto, I think Steve Martin said this, and probably a lot of people have said this, but be so good they can't ignore you, so that was always kind of what I tried to do. But yeah, my graduate school experience was not awesome. I felt like a definite underdog in that program, in that department. Judith Langzamont was a wonderful teacher, but she retired after my first year there. So after that, I kind of bounced around to a couple of different teachers, and none of them really thought much of me or my work. And so I felt like I had to go to my lessons and basically just defend myself, which was an interesting thing to have to go through as a young composer. I think in the end, I think it was good for me to learn how to defend myself and talk about my music. But it was really hard at the time.
I'm wondering, how did you come up with a plan to get through that difficult period of time? What did you do to get through it and persevere?
Yeah, well, I'm quite stubborn, and I knew it was what I really wanted to do. And I also knew that my music was connecting with people, because I was in graduate school and I was already getting commissioned. And actually, one of my teachers at the time hadn't really ever been commissioned. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Kind of a weird relationship, student-teacher relationship. It didn't work very well, you know. And then I was told by one of my teachers that I couldn't work on my commissions in my lessons. And I was like, so I've got to do double the compositional work right now. Like that was really hard. I was like, and I really wanted help with the pieces that I was writing on commission. I mean, those were really important to me. So it was just a very, very odd thing. But I think I got enough feedback from the outside musical community that let me know that I was connecting with people and I was getting commissioned. I won a few competitions when I was 25. That really bolstered my ego, you know. So yeah. And another interesting thing about this is because I never knew any composers growing up, I did not really think that this was something I was going to succeed greatly at. It was something that I just wanted to try. I was like, this is my passion. I love it. Let's see what happens, you know? And I know I've surprised myself and I've surprised my family by the fact that I'm actually pretty good at it. You know, I didn't imagine that I would have gotten this far. And that's a wonderful surprise. It also takes a weight off my shoulders. It's like, oh, I've already gotten farther than I ever thought I would. So can't screw it up now, you know? And so it lets me enjoy it, I think, in a different way than maybe others.
I first met composer Polina Nazaykinskaya in 2009. One of her works was being performed by the Minnesota Orchestra, and it was wonderful. And when the concert was over, I went to her, having never met her, and said, how many works for orchestra have you written? And she said, oh, this one was my first one. It was called Winter Bells. And I always like telling the story because I accused her of lying to me that something sounding so wonderful couldn't possibly have been her very first work, but it was. And we have been friends ever since. And she has composed, her first symphony was written for the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. And we will be performing the premiere of a new orchestration of her work called Phoenix in November of 2021. Polina, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Bill. I love your introduction. I love that story. I always love hearing about it.
Tell me and our audience about how you came to be a composer. I'm going to preface it by saying that I know that you play piano, violin, flute, accordion, ukulele, trombone, and I'm probably leaving out a few of the things, and also that you are a wonderful conductor, and that you write music in genres of everything from ballet to opera to orchestral music to art song. So you have a really, really huge repertoire of composition and an amazing musical background. How did you become a composer?
Thank you so much for saying that, Bill. I always wanted to write music. As long as I remember myself, I was drawn to piano, to improvisation, and to expressing myself through music. So officially, I started writing for myself. I considered myself as a composer from the very start. I'd say at maybe 4 years old. So I was already writing at 4. Not even writing down, but improvising mostly. As soon as I learned how to write music, I started writing down my musical thoughts as well. But not until I was 21 years old, I was called a composer officially, because before that I studied violin, flute, and piano, as I mentioned, and I was pretty serious about my violin studies in particular. So I went to Moscow Conservatory College as a violinist, still trying to pursue, performance career and career as a musician, orchestral musician. But I always wanted to be a composer. It just happened that there was no teacher in my hometown, so no teacher knew what to do with me as a composer. So they encouraged me to continue studying instruments very well. And I did just that, but I kept composing as a self-taught composer for most of my life, actually. And only in Moscow, I met my first composition teacher, Konstantin Batashov, who was awesome.
What was it like being a female in Russia trying to be a composer?
It wasn't too good, actually, because people just didn't believe, when I would say I'm a composer, they were like, but you're a girl. So yeah, there's no understanding of this sort yet. It's getting better, much better. We have some fantastic female composers now in Russia. And we had a few iconic figures in the 20th century, actually, but it's rather unique, to be a female composer. But I didn't care about the judgment around this whole idea. I really didn't know how to react, and I just kept composing, so I was very lucky in terms of my own, I didn't care too much what people thought of my gender. I just wanted to be a composer, and I searched for my teacher, and I met him, and he was just wonderful. And yes, occasionally he would say some things, about me being a female composer, but he was in fact using that as a pedagogical device, to kind of press on like, oh, don't write like a girl, which is a stupid thing to say. But, in the mentality of Russian person, it meant try harder.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So did the difficulty of trying to be a female composer in Russia, did that contribute to your wanting to come to the United States?
Partly, yes. I just wanted to be free, and to do what I did already at that point. But I also just applied to Yale School of Music, and I really wanted to study at Yale. And I didn't know much about it, but I knew that there's some fantastic faculty and that it was free. That was one of the main reasons I applied, because I couldn't afford paying for my education. So that was one reason I came, that I got in and I got the full scholarship. I was incredibly lucky to get that.
Well, and you've now, a few years after that, you've been involved both as a student and a teacher at a number of different institutions. Tell us about that.
I love being a teacher. I love being a mentor. I still, treat my students as colleagues. We learn from each other a lot. It's going to be my 6th year teaching at Brooklyn College as a adjunct composition professor. And I had some fantastic students. I learned a lot from them. The newer generation of composers is very fascinating because they are free of any prejudice about style. And they're writing heavy metal music with symphonic orchestra, something like that, and this is so inspiring for me. The sound world that they're achieving, they're fantastic. And basically my job is just to help them with the skill itself, how to write a longer melody. I don't touch the style, I trust their judgment. I will never ask them to change who they are. I love actually when they are discovering their own voice. It's not so easy, people are still drawn to, am I right by writing something like this, things like that. But I always encourage to reach inside of themselves, and I always ask, my first question is, what kind of music do you love to listen to? Not what they have to listen, and most of them say heavy metal or pop music or jazz. And I tell them that they need to reach out to that source of inspiration and just be free to write whatever. So it's been great. Yeah, I love teaching.
Who are some of the teachers that you've worked with here in the US, your composition teachers?
I was incredibly lucky to study with Christopher Theophanidis, who's a phenomenal composer of our time. I feel like his music is just so powerful and beautiful, and his orchestration is just phenomenal. I learned so much from him, and he was so supportive throughout my life, actually. I learned a lot from him. My first teacher here in the States was Ezra Laderman, a fantastic, iconic American composer. So I also learned a lot from him. And at that point, he was in his 90s when I was his student. So at that advanced age, he was still so funny, so loving. He loved his life, he loved music. it was a great inspiration to study with him, just to see a person who is 90 something years old, but he's still writing and he's active. That was great. And I also studied with a great composer, Cuban-American composer, Tanya Leon. And I studied with her for 3 years, and she became a great friend and mentor throughout the years now. I can't thank her enough, because she is a role model for me, because she is a female composer and she's a conductor, and she's just a great artist.
I mentioned in the intro that the Metropolitan Symphony is going to be playing your work Phoenix. We've now rescheduled it for this coming November, and it's not the premiere of the music, but it's a premiere of the music in this in an enlarged form. Tell us a little bit about that piece, how it was originally composed, and then what people who are going to be at our concert in November, what's different about this version as opposed to the earlier version of the piece.
So that piece came 2 years after my symphony. So I had some kind of it's pretty big break from writing for symphony orchestra. So it was again very scary to start a new orchestral poem. I knew that's going to be much smaller in scale than the symphony, but again, I learned some things from writing a symphony, and I wanted to apply some of the knowledge that I knew. My idea was to try to write something that's very continuous. My music tends to be like a tableau kind of music with many different sections attached to each other, very contrasting sections. And I think I know how to do it. It's inspired by Stravinsky type of development, musical development. But in this one, I'm consciously making a decision of not doing that. So the piece is one huge line, and it was not easy to do, but I'm pretty pleased. I had mixed reactions from some conductors. They're like, "Where's your music? Like, where's your exciting music?" And I said, "This is my point. I'm making a point here. I want to write a huge line, huge melody." And the subject is kind of, now I'm thinking about it, it's Phoenix, it's rising from the ashes, rebirth of something. And I feel like it's so symbolic right now in our time, right? After COVID, we just need to be reborn again. We need to pull ourselves to the sky, kind of this magical process of rebirth. This new orchestration is much more expanded, so it's hugely it's bigger than the original one. The original one was for kind of a smallish orchestra with no brass, only horns, but no trombones, and I only had timpani in the original version. Now I have a bunch of interesting percussion instruments, and it was so fun actually, Bill, when you sent me the first rehearsal footage. I loved hearing different types of, how do we strike the tam-tam like this, or do we scratch it? So it's a great process of discovery. I can't wait to hear it again. It was quite a long break now, right? More than a year we didn't hear it. Now to go back to this piece, it will be very interesting. Maybe we'll discover some more cool techniques.
Now that you've had the chance to meet Carol, Jocelyn, and Polina individually and hear them describe the music they composed specifically for the MSO and me, and to hear about their paths to becoming the gifted composers they are today, it's my honor to host the three of them together in a roundtable discussion. In 2018, composer Jennifer Higdon gained a lot of attention for complaining vociferously about the fact that neither the Philadelphia Orchestra nor the Chicago Symphony had programmed a single work by a female composer for the 2018-2019 season. My first question to the group is, do you think that anything has changed in the ensuing 3 years?
Well, I think it's something that has to be continually renewed. It's like every once in a while we're reminded, oh yeah, we need to be paying attention to this and be conscious and thinking about this in our programming. And so in the past couple of years, I think I have seen a big improvement on that, but I'm sure that will wane again. and that we'll need to renew our commitment to programming the works of women.
Yeah, I agree. It needs to be revisited, has been revisited. There was, several years ago, 10 years ago, something about the Berlin Phil, and then there was the proms in London, and now it's this. And so people get a little bit more aware of what's going on, and few things happen. And actually, to me, thanks to the events of the past year, not necessarily with women, but with composers of color, this seems a little bit superseded, so that we're not only seeing more women, but we're seeing more persons of color programmed as well. And that can only help, I'd say.
I definitely see an improvement this season. I see many of my colleagues' music being programmed, and I'm very happy about that. And I want to applaud, United States of America for doing a fantastic job and improving the situation, because I can compare it to Russia, and the major orchestras in Russia are still not playing music by female composers almost at all.
Carol, you were at the University of Minnesota when Libby Larsen and Steve Paulus were instrumental, pun intended, in starting the Minnesota Composers Forum, which has now evolved into the American Composers Forum. What was that like back then, being a young woman in a fairly major composition program and trying to get started?
Well, we were lucky, because not only were there Libby and myself, but there was Marjorie Ruschi and a few other women that were in that Friday afternoon comp class seminar. And I think possibly we outnumbered the guys a lot of the time. And it's not that we were so encouraged, because at that point, we all just sort of took our place on the piano bench and played through our stuff or not, depending on how well we played, and explain things. And then there would be a little bit of a discussion, and we'd move on to the next one. And so, that's why the Composers Forum started, was because we had basically no idea of how things really sounded. So it really wasn't a big problem. It was a problem more of anybody getting performed, because the big ensembles were busy working on the canon, so that their members would have an experience in case they wanted to go on and be real players. It was actually prehistory, if you want to look at it that way.
Jocelyn, when you were participating in a convention, you came up with a slogan that you used at your booth at the convention that said, "Compose like a girl," which I thought was very clever. But you've had some mixed reactions to that.
Yeah, it really surprised me, actually, with that marketing campaign, that we had some conductors, and some of the conductors were women, who had a problem with that, and didn't understand what the big deal was. What if we said compose like a boy, and it's just like, wow. So I guess we still need to talk about this, huh? I actually withdrew for like 2 days, and just like couldn't really talk about it. I ended up doing a big newsletter about the subject, I think, after that. And but it inspired me to keep going with that campaign and to continue that work. So Compose Like a Girl is going to become a podcast and a choral series someday. I'm working on getting all that going, but and I love donating my time to mentoring young women composers, and just being someone that they can come to and ask questions, and help them get their feet wet with publishing, because there's so much to learn when you want to become a composer, and they don't teach you all of it in graduate school. There's a lot to making this work.
I say brava, brava, brava. And I also say, thank goodness I'm old enough to be able to sort of go,
It's interesting that when I talk with the three of you, you all mention your families and in some cases children. And that's really rare to hear a male composer ever talk about that. Do you, and then this leads to a question of, do you feel like you are too often referred to as a female composer rather than as a composer? How do you feel about being grouped in as a woman composer versus just being a composer? Does that make you mad?
If I were only performed on programs with other female composers and not even considered for other programs, then it would make me mad. But that's not been true, really. If some silly musicologist is trying to put people in a slot, that would make me mad. But I think we're getting past that. I hope we're getting past that. And if we're not, I will go and knock on the musicologist's door and say, "Hey, wake up."
It's such a difficult subject for me because I really never thought about of myself as being a female something. I'm just a musician. I'm a composer. So when people try to categorize me into this, I am slightly annoyed, honestly. I don't know why. Maybe because I had to deal with this, kind of proving my rights to write in Russia. Not being focused on that, as I mentioned, I was focused on learning how to write, how to become a composer, how to perfect my craft. But I really hope that one day we'll be just composers, no female, no male, just composers. No one will care about the gender. That's my sincere hope for the future.
I have more of a problem, I'd say, with and this has always been true throughout music history, that maybe a small group of composers from an era get chosen and played and overplayed and put into the canon, the archive, that's everything, and everybody else who is almost as good or just as good, or varying degrees of good, is not, and they're sort of forgotten. And I think that's been true historically, and I think it's true today. And so one of the big pluses of this last year was a conscious reaching out and trying to widen the search for different kinds of music, different kinds of composers, not only gender, but race, and not just the standard Western canon. World music is getting to be, I think, more of a thing, and I'm so happy that is true. It can only invigorate the scene, the musical world.
My dear friend Abby Bettinas, who's also a composer in Minnesota, I don't remember where this happened, but she was studying with someone and writing some music, and the feedback that she got from her teacher was, you want to be careful that you don't write a lot of pretty music, because then you will be categorized as too feminine, and just be kind of labeled in that way. And that was really hard feedback for her to hear. And it's definitely something that I think about. I think it's also why I've written so much empowering music, especially for women to sing. I love writing music that's empowering to perform. Because if a male composer writes something that's lush and beautiful, he's usually complimented on his sensitivity. But if a woman were to do that, it's like, oh yeah, that's expected. That's not really that interesting for her. That's
Except that as a programmer for choirs with Dale Worland, we used to get a huge pile of slow, pretty music from everybody, and I'm talking, mostly men. and it was so tiring. You know, where are the fast, happy, or where are the pieces that really speak strongly and not just mess around with pretty chords? You know, uh, where are they? It's still going on.
Well, and this was a topic of conversation on Facebook the other day. Do you think that music is harder to compose
What,
than
the slow, pretty stuff?
the slow, pretty stuff?
Oh, the fast that really makes a point?
Mhm.
Well, yeah, because it has more measures in it. It has more notes.
More notes, more decisions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Paulina, where do you see this issue?
I know that in my utopic idea of being just a composer, being an artist, not being categorized, before we get there, I feel like what's happening now, it's instrumental. It's we need to fight, right? We need to fight for our rights. Maybe sometime in the future we'll be just equals. But again, I just wanted to mention that in this country, it's just so much better than in some other countries. So we have to be grateful for the opportunities, you know, and I'm grateful every day because again, seeing what's happening in my own country is completely different. You know, there's no chance. Like people just they see through you. They will not consider you as an artist if you're a female. So having gotten through that, right now, every time I'm seeing my colleagues being programmed at the major orchestras, I'm just so happy. This is great. What's happening, right? It's not ideal, but it's better than in other countries for sure.
I'm wondering, because the three of you are now established enough that you are having a number of commissions coming your ways, but have you in the past, and I guess more interestingly, is there any chance that at the moment, are you writing something that no one has commissioned and that you don't have a specific time for the first performance, but that you're just writing because you need to write this piece?
Oh, sure. You mean, in fact, all of my orchestra pieces are like that. And then happily with this last one, I managed to sell the idea. And so, you know, it got to be a commission. But yeah, you know, of course.
What do you have incubating right now?
Oh, my opera, which I started in 1991. And it's, you know, it's still in the works. And the only reason I'm still working on it is because I still like the music. So there you are. Perhaps in the next few years, we will at least hear, you know, piano voice rendition of it. Who knows?
Polina, how about you? Are you writing now, or have you written in the past something that you just had to write, even though you didn't know if and when it would be performed?
I've been so lucky with commissions that I really love, so I was very busy with that. But during the quarantine, during the pandemic, I had a little more time. So I started that Caprice solo violin caprices project. No one commissioned me to write those. My friends asked me to write it, but it wasn't a commission. They just suggested that, and I went for it, and it was wonderful. I had so much fun, but it feels like a luxury a little bit, you know, to do something beyond the commissioned pieces. And I know how lucky we are to have that, right? Like I have to write this commission, but I also want to write something else.
And Jocelyn, how about you?
It's fun to carve out that little bit of extra time that we consider it kind of a professional hobby. I'm also married to a composer, so you know we can talk shop all day long. But the things that I try and find the time for are my kind of my side gig, which is performing with my husband as a band. We have a band called Nation, and we just got asked to do a gig for ACDA next spring. And we have a little bit of money, so we're going to hire a string quartet, which means, oh, well, we need music that we can sing with a string quartet. So I'll be spending some time doing that this fall, and so will he. But that's really fun to write the stuff that we get to perform. It scratches a different itch.
Well, I wanted to close this out by thanking all three of you for your time in this conversation. It's fascinating, and I wish we had an ongoing series because there's a lot of topics to discuss. we were lucky enough to do Jocelyn's Notebooks of Leonardo in 2019. This in November of 2021, coming up in a few months, we'll be doing with the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra the premiere of Phoenix, a work that Polina wrote a year or two ago in a smaller orchestration, but now we're going to hear it in her big orchestra version in November, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. And this coming May, we'll have actually 2 performances in the Twin Cities of the new work that Carol has written called Will's Ladies, with a song cycle for mezzo-soprano Clara Osofsky in 5 movements with texts of 5 Shakespearean heroines. So that is going to be, we have those 2 pieces to look forward to for this coming season, and I'm quite sure we will be doing some more work of Jocelyn in upcoming years. But it is such a joy for me to know the 3 of you as friends. I make the point often that the Metropolitan Symphony has been playing music by women since before it was fashionable or required, I guess maybe is a better word. I just saw today a program from the Metropolitan from 1990, which was 2 music directors ago, where we played a piece by Carol Barnett called Nocturne. And we've done, of course, music by a number of other women as well. But what I will say, speaking for the MSO, is that I want to play the best music of today that's being written. And a lot of it is by women. I'm not looking for women composers. I'm looking for good composers. And I have 3 of the most extraordinary ones right here today. And thank you all for being part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.